stages of becoming a scientist, but I remember that was all I cared about, Jana. I didn't care about God. I didn't think about God. The church services I went to made no impression on me whatsoever. I was just in my own bubble, and that was who I was when I bid my parents and my family goodbye on that day at LAX in Los Angeles, and I flew to Cornell to formally train as a scientist in grad school. And we can talk more about what happened then. But those were my formative years. That's who I was. And one more thing is, which is very compatible with wanting to be a scientist, is that I was very curious. I still am. I ask questions. There's no questions off the table. No question is off the table, in my opinion. You ask anything you want. And my motto to people who follow me, ask tough questions, demand honest answers. So that was my defining personality. And I remember when I grew up and I started teaching at Cornell and I started teaching at Harvard, I made it a point to tell my kids, there's no stupid question. Do not hold off asking a question. I know you're going to think, oh, my friends here in class are going to think I'm stupid if I ask that question. Don't think that way. And I even took it to another level. And I started, especially when I was at Harvard, and I told my kids, I said, I'm going to judge you not only on the grades that you get on your quizzes and your exams and class participation, but the questions you ask. And I said, hit me with your toughest questions. And the tougher question you ask me, the better grade you're going to get. So I wanted to put a premium on curiosity, put a premium in. Unfortunately, school today, most schools, especially public schools, teachers are overworked, underpaid. They don't want to put up with people like me who are just always asking questions. But that for me was my youth. That's who I was when I climbed on that plane and traveled from LA to Ithaca, New York, where Cornell is. And to this day, I'm still that person. But honestly, I'm still a skeptic, even though I'm a Christian. Because even the Bible says, the Bible commands us to discern the spirits. Well, what does that mean, discern the spirits? What does the Bible talk about? It's asking you to be discriminating, to ask questions and demand honest answers. I mean, just put it simply, that's what the Bible is saying. And you should never reach a point in your life, no matter how certain you are about your faith, that you should stop asking questions. And we can get into more of that later on. I know what I believe, and I can explain to you why I believe it. And I do not fear any questions from people, questions that I ask myself, questions that you might ask me today. I'm completely at peace here because I know what I believe and why I believe it.
We can't hear that enough, Dr. G. Honestly, truth doesn't fear questioning, right? And it's
No.
obvious to me you've been at the highest levels, Cornell, Harvard,
Yeah.
I guess you would say, in terms of you've been in the fire, you remain in the fire in terms
Yeah.
of being willing to go there with anyone, and that speaks really to the robust nature of your beliefs, that you do know why you believe what you believe. But I still love, though, that you say that you're still a skeptic, and as we should be, in the sense of always asking questions, being willing to go where the truth leads us.
I believe in the Bible, but it took me a long time to get there. I mean, as I said, when I remember landing in Ithaca, New York, far from my family, far from everything, all my friends, everything. I just left it all behind. And I didn't know a soul in Ithaca, New York. Not a soul. I had no relative there. I mean, I was literally alone. And it was a kind of wilderness experience for me. But it was okay because I had my science, and that was my love of my life. I didn't need anything else. I didn't need a social life. I didn't want a social life. I felt that would interfere. And so I became a scientific monk, and literally, and I choose those words carefully because what's a monk? A monk is somebody who sequesters himself in a cloistered environment and just immerses himself. Well, I immersed myself in science, and I felt I was the luckiest guy in the world. So I worked 7 days a week, typically slept about 3 hours. I'd leave the lab maybe at 1 or 2, 3 in the morning, wake up at 6, go back to the lab, barely groomed myself. I had a basement lab at that time it was called the Lab of Nuclear Studies. Today I think it's called the Lab of Elementary Particle Physics. And it was in the basement, no windows. So I didn't know if it was day or night. I didn't care if it was day or night. I didn't care if it was Monday, Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I didn't care if it was Martin Luther King Day or Independence Day. I mean, I was literally, when I say I was a scientific monk, I was thoroughly head over heels in love with science. And that's the only thing I cared about. When I made a few friends in grad school, all we did was talk physics. In the midst of my study in physics, I wanted to solve a problem that was in astronomy, so I had to take astronomy classes. Then it became very mathematical. So I ended up having 3 offices at Cornell. I don't think that's ever been done before. I had an office in the physics department. Actually, I had 4 offices. I had an office in the physics department. I had an office in the math department. I had an office in the astronomy department. And then I actually ended up having an office in the engineering department, electrical engineering, because without getting into details, my thesis chairman was an electrical engineer. So I mean, but the whole time I was just in love with science. That's all I cared about. Science was the only thing I ever loved in my life. And so it wasn't like, oh, I'm rejecting this, I'm rejecting. No, I never thought of it. I never thought of God. I never thought of worshiping a God. I never thought of the supernatural world. My world was the universe, the physical universe. I just wanted to learn as much about the universe as I could. So yes, in retrospect, I had a materialistic worldview. That's the typical kind of modern scientific worldview. It hasn't always been. If you go back to the founding of the scientific method in Christian Europe, and during the 16 and 1700s, and even before that in the 1500s with Galileo and so forth, they were Christians, and so they had no trouble being Christians and scientists at the same time. But that's not the case today. And I think you said it very well, Jana. I think science itself is agnostic. Science doesn't take sides. Science has no real opinion about whether God exists or doesn't exist. It doesn't want to get involved in that discussion. Science is a materialistic endeavor, at least modern science is now. So the only thing, if you really want to be strict about today's modern scientific method, as opposed to the one back, as I say, in the 15, 16, and 1700s in Europe, today's scientific method is very secular. But even though it's in the sense that you're not expected or allowed to use God as part of any of your explanations. But that does not mean, and this is where people get confused. So they jump to the conclusion, oh, well, then that means science is atheistic. No, it doesn't. Let's put it this way. If you think of science as a game, it has certain rules, just like any game. If you're playing, pinochle or poker or whatever game you're playing, there are rules, right? And so today's rules of scientific engagement is that we all agree that the explanations we come up with, that we offer to explain the evidence that we gather, has to be secular. And it was a shock to me when I began learning that science cannot answer certain really tough questions. And so, well, first and foremost was the question, simple but profound question of where did everything come from? Now, up until then, I had drank the Kool-Aid. I had bought into the standard scientific explanation of the Big Bang Theory. Now, back then, when I was a grad student, there was just kind of the vanilla flavor Big Bang Theory. Now, there are various flavors of Big Bang Theory. We don't have to get into it. But there's the inflationary Big Bang Theory and so forth. But and then you have cold matter and dark matter. It's much more complicated now. But back then, the answer to my question, where did everything come from? The answer to that tough question that science was offering me, my beloved science, was saying, well, it's the Big Bang Theory. Okay, well, it's a very glamorous theory, and it's a But then, as a grad student, I started taking classes in cosmology, and especially when I started broadening out from just physics into astronomy and math. So I started taking classes in cosmology. And when you look at the Big Bang Theory in detail, up close and personal, as it were, you start seeing it's got a lot of problems. It's got a lot of holes. And scientists, especially scientists who are atheists, they'll oh no, they're just little minor things we can, we have an explanation. Oh, well, no, you don't. And so there was a point where, for me to maintain my intellectual integrity, my intellectual honesty, I just really had to face up to the fact that the answer to my tough question that science was offering me just wasn't adequate. But then that created a crisis for me, because here I am, this young man who has lived all his life believing that science could answer all my tough questions. I really believed it. I believed that given enough time, gather enough evidence, science will answer all our questions. Well, I've left that naivete behind many, many years ago, because that ain't going to happen. In fact, quite the opposite. As we ask more questions and we dig more deeply, the questions multiply like rabbits, and the questions become deeper and more profound. And the Big Bang Theory is an example of that, where, okay, that's a good start. All right, the universe began with a kind of an explosive expansion of some kind. It wasn't like people think, like a stick of dynamite that goes off. It's more subtle than that. It's literally time and space erupted from the quantum vacuum. And the quantum vacuum itself is, woof, that's, that is like a logical contradiction, but we don't need to get into that. But that, you're like, okay, well, the quantum vacuum is nothing, right? And it burped out this universe. So boom, there's your answer. Nothing, everything came out of nothing. Well, how exactly does that work? And when you start looking at the math and you start looking at the physics and the astronomy behind it, you realize no, it doesn't answer the question, where did everything come from? It kicks the can down the road. So because you say, okay, well, what happened before the Big Bang? Well, there was the quantum vacuum. Oh, okay, well, where did the quantum vacuum come from? Well, the natural laws of the universe. Oh, okay, well, where did the natural laws of the universe come from? I mean, and I don't mean to be flippant, but I'm just trying to communicate to your viewers that that's just really the honest truth. And I am, if anything, I am intellectually rigorous. I am strict. I don't buy any baloney. Not from Christians, not from scientists. I don't buy baloney, period. I ask tough questions and I demand honest answers. But there was a crisis then. I was like, oh, okay, well, if my science can't answer it, and my science was my entire world, where do I go for answers?
When I was an atheist, I would have dismissed these arguments as a God of the gaps argument, missing the point altogether. A God of the gaps argument is a suggestion of a mere gap, and calling the limitations of science in providing a comprehensive and evidence-based reasoning for how the universe came to be is kind of like looking at somebody with only one tooth and saying that they have a gap of teeth in their mouth. It's kind of nonsensical whenever you think about the fact that 95% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy, once called the missing mass problem. This reflects that we do not, nor will we have, the tools of measurement to be able to ever understand completely how the universe currently holds itself together, let alone how it came to exist out of the quantum vacuum. If you want to read more on these topics, Believing is Seeing by this gentleman here, Michael Guillen. A great treat to read. He is coming out with a film on this book here in the coming months, and do have a planned discussion with him as well. Lord willing, we're going to have that discussion. Also, Amazing Truths, How Science and the Bible Agree. He goes over 10 different topics here on this, 10 separate chapters. Of course, one of them being In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The Bible, the only book with a creation story noting that there was nothing, there was no time and space, and then all of it came to exist at once. Something that science called foolishness up until very recently. I mean, even Einstein and others of his era were saying that the notion that the universe came to exist out of nothing was foolishness for a while. Eventually, Einstein came around on that view, and he came to believe in God himself. Not a personal God, but he did come to belief in God because it was clear that the universe has a creator. And that's not a God of the gaps argument. You don't have a foundational way to underpin how time and space came to be without an intelligence that necessarily created it, an intelligence that is immaterial. Anything that's material does require a creator. Something that is immaterial outside the existence of time and space would not necessarily require one. Hence, something that exists that is infinite and quite intelligent, has an intelligence beyond our comprehension, and abilities beyond our comprehension, depths beyond our comprehension. And that God became flesh and dwelt among us, lived a life we could never live, died and took on the punishment that we deserved and saved us. And all we have to do is not reject him, and he'll let us into heaven, which is pretty awesome. Just turn to Jesus, repent, turn from sin, flee all sin. You'll have a better life. Christ is King. Every knee will bow. Absolutely.